the 228 owners that are in that 2027 deadline were all identified under the WCC process, earthquake-prone building policy. WCC has a moral obligation to help those owners through. It was your policy that progressed that. You may be thinking that the numbers are going to stop. The numbers of earthquake-prone buildings will stop, but they won't. You know, the graph is not the end of it. The National Seismic Hazard Model has been reviewed. It has already identified a significant change for Wellington. MB are already starting to put that into the building code documents. There'll be a raft of other buildings coming through, and once that building standard is updated, and they'll start coming through quite quickly, potentially earthquake-prone, then earthquake-prone. But the real risk is that the legislation that provides protection for owners that have completed the strengthening or in the process through the definition of moderate earthquake is going to be lost, because the intent of that legislation was to provide certainty to owners. So they wouldn't have to have strengthening round after strengthening round. But that's been undermined by implementation, by council officers, by engineers, and by other professionals. So owners have said, strengthen as high as you can, because in case the regulations change. Well, the intent was that they wouldn't have to strengthen again. So councillors have to actually demand and really advocate to central government at the management and politician level that certainty stays. You know, it's not acceptable that these owners that are losing their homes and their savings then have to face it again. Well, and if they're unlucky enough to buy another apartment that becomes earthquake prone. So I think I'll stop there and get some questions, but you cannot just wait and see. The cost-benefit analysis done by MB said that this policy, the cost far exceeded the benefits, but they ignored it. You cannot ignore it.
Thanks, Geraldine. Councillor Pennant.
Thanks, Geraldine. As you know, I know that you did a survey of building owners recently to find out, amongst other things, costs for earthquake strengthening, which is average around 400K. Have you had recent conversations with owners to see how much those costs have increased, given we know the market's under pressure at the moment?
Not really, except one building that's in the process of strengthening. Their cost went up $1 million.
So what was the original cost for strengthening? I
think it was about 6.5 or 6. It's gone to 7.5.
Okay. Okay.
But I haven't. I haven't got that.
Okay. No.
But there's the reason that it has gone up. Everything else has.
Yeah. Okay. You also are aware that the Building Resilience Fund was removed in the LTP. So you are of the view that that should come back, but at a bigger amount, presumably?
Well, we need to have, and I think, substantive proposals.
Did you have a question?
In the planning for growth environment, era, there was one of the council actually proposed that, as part of the sort of package of information that went out, look at all these earthquake-prone sites around Wellington. Basically saying to developers, there's an opportunity for you to maximise, to actually do some development. And I challenged councillors at that time to say, well, where are those offers? What are you going to put on the table to owners to share costs and risks and actually help maybe increase this number of apartments that are available on those sites? But don't expect owners to do that development. So where is that information? Where is those developments? So you need to be looking at those substantive, big initiatives. The non-heritage Building Resilience Fund, that helps. It's small, but it's an indication that at least there's some recognition that is more than just heritage that actually need this money. Okay. But also the problem with that fund was that it didn't go far enough in what it could cover. And for most of these buildings in the 228, they've already spent that money. They've already done that work that was covered. So you need to be thinking much bigger about what the support is. The advisory service needs more technical specialist input. It can't just refer owners to other parts of council. At least they could facilitate that access. They can't just refer to legal to lawyers, or they can't just refer to another body corporate. They have to be able to provide that information directly. But if council can't do it, then you have to demand that MB stand up and front up and put a proper implementation support framework.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Geraldine, can I just ask, would you be comfortable with the prior regime where we didn't have these requirements to strengthen? In other words, people just lived in these properties at their own risk and people walked around Wellington at their own risk? Or would you prefer the regime where we have to strengthen up to a certain engineering standard as we've got at the moment?
I prefer the prior regime where it was based on buildings where there were known points of failure. So the prior regime in 1991 Building Act was about unreinforced masonry, unreinforced concrete, and there are known failures. And there's no question about those buildings. But in the 2003 Building Bill, that was just removed by officials and made it apply to all building types. No data. The public didn't even know, and Parliament didn't even know that change was happening. So I don't agree with the current policy because it's too one size fits all. We should be looking at building types where there are known points of failure. Hollow core floors, precast floors, that may be one. Soft story buildings, that may be another. We've talked with an engineer and he's saying what's happening now is that it was intended to get the worst of the worst buildings, but it's not.
Yeah, too blunt.
It's
typical government stuff.
And,
Yep.
And engineers just push the rating down.
Yeah. Okay, Geraldine, well, thanks so much. We're out of time now. I really appreciate you coming along and sharing that with us and giving us those messages. And have a great Christmas.
Oh, I look forward to hearing the outcome.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I want to know that there's going to be a consultation on the enforcement policy, not just the commission.
Yeah. I think there's... I'm going to make a few phone calls. Right, Martin Payne from Ofero Stream, Friends of Ofero Stream, yeah. Martin's going to come talk to us today about the strategic waste planning overview. So welcome, Martin. You've got 10 minutes. You know the drill. Leave a few minutes for a few questions. There will be some. And otherwise, look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you. Tēnā koutou katoa. My name is Martin Payne and I'm here representing Friends of Ofero Stream, a stream restoration group, and here to talk to you about waste. In this context, I'm also a member of the WCC Residual Waste Options Working Group. I begin with an acknowledgement of your work as councillors and also the work of council officers. This is what could be described as a perfect storm: waste, water, climate change, housing, poverty, and COVID. You demonstrate your fortitude and passion for venturing out into these torrid elements every day. We want to thank you for your service to the community, but beyond that, we would also like to stand with you, alongside you, in this mahi to provide calm, certainty and stability to our community, so that we can all live, work and play in an equitable and productive way. Now, returning back to waste, let's be clear that there have been forecasts for many decades of the coming storm. We are consuming the planet at an unsustainable rate and continuing to dispose of resources in a wasteful way. Our group, FOOS, supports the WMMP as an appropriate vehicle for Wellington City's waste plan, but think that the focus needs to be firmly located on the local and urgent action with a strong element of regional collaboration. The current WMMP is a 10-year plan created in 2017 with a vision for a 30% reduction in waste to municipal landfills in the Wellington region by 2026. While there are plans for progress, most notably the sewage sludge processing plant, there seems little prospect of any actual waste reduction to landfill by 2026. In the strategic waste planning paper presented today, the item 9 in the officer's recommendation notes the estimated potential to reduce the amount of municipal solid waste tonnage entering the southern landfill by half over the next 15 years. So in the 10 years up to 2026, it is acknowledged that we are very unlikely to achieve even a 0% reduction, let alone a 30% reduction, and yet in the 10 years between 2026 and 2036, there is a potential for a 50% reduction of waste to landfill. Reading the fine print in the documents, you will find that the 50% prediction is only for some of the waste streams entering the landfill, with a number of caveats, which include population growth, consumer behaviour change, and further central government regulation. So the 50% headline in that statement actually risks being little more than an illusion. What Wellington and its environment cannot afford is to make another plan that measures its success at the end of another decade, and then revise at year 6 and push the waste reduction goal out for a further decade. What we need is a plan, a more timely plan, a different way of planning that enables the plan to be made, owned and actioned by the whole community, and most of all, one that makes real sense. Our group, Friends of Awhero Stream, have demonstrated for almost 2 decades that we want to be part of the waste solution. We are creative, action-orientated, and have learned to do a lot with very little in the way of financial resources. We have strong ecological skills and knowledge, and are quickly developing expertise in stormwater, wastewater, waste, and urban planning, because those are the pressures on the Awhero Stream. Our message to Council as you deliberate on these important matters are: we need to accelerate our transition to minimal or zero waste. We need a comprehensive WMMP plan before we design and build a substantial extension to the southern landfill. We do recognise that the community still needs a landfill while we make the transition, and that there is considerable pressure to maintain continuity of services. Given that, Friends of Awhero Stream offers to support the Council in consenting a short-term extension to the southern landfill, to allow time for the WMMP to be created with the community, and then enable the appropriate design of a more substantial landfill extension for the southern landfill. And given that, we need the opportunity to talk and understand the problem, fully understand the problem. And this is rather than face off with the Council in the resource consent process. Our group, and I know a lot of other groups, are really keen to be engaged with this problem. We can see the pressure that the Council is under, and we want to be part of the solution. So thank you for your time, and I hope you can take this into account in your deliberations on this paper today. But further than that, ensuring that we don't get into a situation where we kick the can down the road, because the storm that we are in, the perfect storm that we are in, actually relates to, I think, deferred decisions in the past. And I actually would commend this, this Council for the decisions and the work it has been doing to address that. So I thank you very much for that and the opportunity to talk to you.
Thanks, Martin. Councillor Calvert, you've got a question?
Yeah, thank you, Martin. And, you know, as you said, we've got a lot of challenges ahead of us, or currently we have. So is there anything that, if we were to put more resourcing, you know, which is quite limited, into this, is there something that we should not put as much resourcing in to sort of be able to support this approach?
in terms of other things that should drop off your list.
Yeah,
Yes,
basically from a priority perspective, because, yeah.
I think one of the things that I'm suggesting to you is that actually it's a new way of planning that we need to actually get the community on board with a new waste plan. And so I think some of those resources will be new resources that actually come from the community in terms of making a new plan, which is a little bit different. I'm not necessarily asking you to do more, but I'm actually asking you to be more collaborative with the community, because in the long run, this is not a problem that the council can solve on its own. Actually, this is a community problem, and the community has got to be encouraged into engaging its resources into solving this as a problem. And I think that is kind of slightly different from the council creating a plan and then talking to the community about it. Actually, we need early engagement with the community to kind of be really creative about how we can do this with very little. That's our suggestion.
Thank
so
you.
The flow of information is really important, but I think a different approach to the way that we create this plan. And I think that's the positive message that I'd like to bring to you.
Thank you.
Councillor Foon.
Kia ora, Martin, and thank you so much for the work you do for our environment through FOOS. It is greatly appreciated and has made that stream a beautiful place to be rather than one that you turn away from. Thank you. The paper before us is asking that the residual waste management options will come before us before the waste minimisation action plan, which were the decisions that we made on October the 14th. And it's basically saying we can't do that. So is your suggestion to keep the community working toward the waste minimisation plan and slow, or not slow the consent, but do a short-term consent at the landfill to enable that to happen?
We're certainly suggesting this as an idea of relieving, because we feel that any decision that is made under too much pressure is likely to be a poor decision. As an engineer, I would see the landfill being designed in a different way when we come out of when we've got the WMMP in place, because we will be much clearer about the waste streams that we will be significantly reducing and the other ones that are going to be more difficult, more challenging to reduce. And my understanding is that landfill design could look really different out of the end of the process than we might design today, or is being designed today. So my feeling is there is the need for a very strong connection, and we're trying to be creative in suggesting there may be a way of relieving some of that pressure so that actually better decisions can be made and a better design can come up. We can come up with a better design. I think there could be quite significant shifts in the way that we manage waste in Wellington out of the end of the WMMP.
Well, thanks, Martin. We're out of time now. Really appreciate you coming along and sharing your expertise with us, and to you also and your family, and to the Friends of Ophira Stream, happy Christmas.
Thank you very much.
Okay, we now have Hazel Kirkham, who's, I believe, online, zooming in from overseas, I believe, actually. She's going to talk to us about the Earthquake-Prone Buildings Program update. Are you there, Hazel? There she is.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? See me?
Can't hear that well. Can you move your microphone maybe towards you?
Can you hear me better now?
Better.
Okay? Yes? Okay, good. All right. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for this opportunity to speak to you about the Earthquake-Prone Buildings Program. Some of you will know me. I'm Hazel Kirkham. Sometimes I'm working alongside ICW. I came in early and I could hear Geraldine's talk, that's good because you're going to have heard quite a few of the things I'm going to say from her. We didn't talk before today, so it's very interesting. We've come to similar conclusions. Until February, my partner and I lived at 1 Tasman Street. That's a complex with 2 earthquake-prone buildings. And as we're looking at a strengthening estimate of 28 million, rising 5% or more per annum. And faced with that impossibility, we formed a collective and sold on a unititled collective basis to Willis Bond in February. So now we're all in a position of not having enough money to buy another home in New Zealand. There are hundreds of other apartment owners facing this kind of terrible consequence from the EPB legislation: loss of capital, loss of life opportunities, enormous stress, and in some cases, housing insecurity. I have asked the council whether there are any plans for social housing for those people who will not have a home if and when they comply or their buildings are compulsorily demolished, and there has been a very firm no to that question. This should not be happening. Private homeowners shouldn't be forced to deliver a public good at their own cost and risk. So it's good that the council want to run the survey and find out what people are thinking, but it's not going to help, unfortunately, if the survey basis is not reliable. So yes, as Geraldine mentioned, the numbers really don't stack up. Of those 240 respondents, many of them were not actually building owners. For example, I and other people who've already moved out were respondents. The total number of 591 are buildings, not owners. My calculation, if you look at owners, is there is around 1,200 owners at the moment. So the response rate was 21%. So you have to be concerned about the reliability of the survey. Second, as Geraldine had said, there is no analysis of your key stakeholders. The people paying for this program are not really well understood. So there's no differentiation between public owners of public buildings, commercial owners of commercial buildings, and apartment owners of residential buildings. You really need to understand those stakeholders much, much better. There's nothing there that tells you what is stopping apartment building owners from complying. And you'll know that there's a number of those buildings that are just stuck. You're stuck with them and the owners are stuck with them. And it's not going to change. And I can just quickly give you a list off the top of my head of why. And none of these things are covered in the survey. It's about cost. It's about no benefits. It's about insurance, uncertainty, disruption to life for 12 or more months while strengthening goes on. The risks of dealing with the construction industry and the risks of opening up a building, an old building, the difficulty for amateurs of dealing with the construction industry, problems working with neighbors and agreeing with them, and having, as in some cases is happening, to hand over your life savings to another neighbor to manage a construction project. And finally, housing insecurity. None of these things are going to change. You know what these things are, you know what the factors are. We have provided in surveys that I've done with ICW data on 23 buildings. By the way, that your survey paper is wrong, not 13 buildings. We provided data on 23 buildings that clearly shows that these are the problems. They are not going to change. Enforcement policies, fines, compulsory demolition, incentives, engagement, charm offensives. These people are not just being awkward, they cannot comply. So the report says you should wait and see what happens because not enough is known. Plenty is known about these apartment buildings. What you need to do is not wait and see, but get up and get a better understanding of the situation and then go to government and say, look, This is not going to change. We're not going to be able to change the situation with apartment owners, and it's not necessary. This is not done anywhere else in the world, and for good reason. It's impossible. The council is determined to try and do something that is impossible. It needs to go to government and say, you know what, there are two things that can happen. Exempt these buildings from the Act, not necessarily URM buildings, but all the others. And if you can't do that, then buy those properties from those owners. Remove that intractable problem, which you have and the owners have. There needs to be a circuit breaker here. The council can help persuade the government to make that happen if it chooses to.
Well, thanks very much, Hazel. We're spot on time there. Unfortunately, we don't have time for any questions, but I think your point is well made. And if you want to stay online, we'll have some Q&A with our officers about some of the subjects you've mentioned that might be of interest to you. Thanks very much.
Great, thank you.
And Merry Christmas, of course. Councillor Pannett, you were waving?
No, I was waving to Hazel.
Not me? I'm the chair.
Oh, you're waving to me. I know.
Okay, folks. Well, thank you very much to all our public participants. And again, Merry Christmas to you all. We'll now move on to the general business, and we'll start with the Priority Investment Quarterly Report. Hazel, we will get to the earthquake-prone stuff, so just go grab a cup of coffee, although this is really interesting. Well, I think she might want to stay on for this. So I'd like to introduce Siobhan Proctor, our Chief of Infrastructure, to introduce this report.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to quickly introduce Pip Oxspring, who has stepped up to the podium. She is our Project Management Office Manager. So it's really good timing for this paper following the Strategic Risk Workshop that you had yesterday. One of those risks was the risk of inadequate planning and prioritisation, and the impact of that being a failure to deliver on our capital plan and a failure to actually plan appropriately. Key mitigation to this risk is the establishment of a project management office. This will provide a systematic process and systems to seek to lift our project management capability and will increase our ability to deliver on our plans and our promises that we've made. There are several areas that need to focus on within the remit of the PMO. A foundational element, though, is the investment delivery framework. So we will take a moment to take you through that. This is the framework that we use in order to develop project scopes, budgets and timeframes, and we measure those in terms of the success of delivery of projects. The better we manage those risks, the better chance we have of delivering projects to time, to cost and to scope. So today's paper presents the investment delivery framework. It also provides a report on 15 priority investment projects. The intent will be to bring this report every quarter to the committee. It will follow the month after the quarterly reporting, and it allows this committee to fulfil its function to monitor and provide oversight for significant projects within its areas of focus. So with the approval of the chair, could we have Pip take us through the investment delivery framework?
Absolutely. Pip, floor's yours.
Morena tātou. So as Siobhan mentioned, we're here to provide the quarterly update on the priority investments. That's to the end of October. So this is the first time we're presenting it, so we're providing a snapshot of what we think is useful to you, but welcome feedback on that, obviously. Also an introduction to
Can you use the microphone so they can hear on Zoom?
Is that not on? I'm just quite tall, and so it's...
I'm envious.
I'll try and lean down. So...
Would you be...
Should I sit down?
Can we sit down?
Yeah.
For what it's worth, I could hear perfectly.
Same, yeah, really clear.
That on now? Cool. So the investment delivery framework is the framework that we use to deliver our projects end to end. So starting with an idea, right through to introduction into service, and then realising benefits and capturing and monitoring those. And projects are inherently risky and subject to change, and so it's really important that we put some rigour and structure around that to ensure that we've got ongoing visibility throughout, so that the investment that we made up front is still on track to be delivered. Why it's useful to talk about the investment delivery framework today is that there's a lot of terminology related to projects and programs that we think would be useful to cover off. And I know there were some specific questions around RAGs on some of the projects that you saw in the report. So it's a good time to sort of talk through what the different RAG statuses mean, the red, amber and green statuses, and why we've applied them to those projects. So if we just look at the diagram that you've got on the screen there, the conceive phase, there's 6 phases in the life cycle in the IDF, and the conceive phase is really around understanding the problem accurately and really trying to work out who the stakeholders are that need to be involved, consulting with the business before we proceed. So it's dedicating more time to that planning and really understanding what it is we're trying to do. The project classification would happen at this stage as well, which is really important for us for understanding the scope and the scale of risk in projects as to what type of business case we would need to ensure that we've got the appropriate level of rigour around large risky projects versus maybe small, less risky. The develop phase is next, and one of the key things we would pull out here is the business case. So this is where we've sort of explored options further. And what's key between each of the stages of the life cycle is that we have decision gates to proceed. So this is where we would bring back those artefacts and really important bits of information to the project board, the governance board, to ensure that they're comfortable that what they signed up to initially is still on track, or that if we've learnt any new information, particularly in the kind of environment we're in now with COVID, that it's a lot more fluid and things are changing a lot more. So it's really important to bring new information forward at each of those stages to ensure that the key people have the right information before making decisions to proceed. So in that diagram, you'll see the different kinds of artefacts within each of the life cycle phases that you might expect to see. What's really important is status reporting throughout. So that needs to start right at the beginning, not just in the deliver phase, because that's where we surface information, and that's where we would capture the information that we would bring forth to this quarterly report that we would provide to you in terms of gaining oversight and ensuring that you're aware of what's happening. It's also a great opportunity to push information out to you so that things that are going well, you don't need to interrogate so much, and things that need support or off track, you have an opportunity to see how you can support that to succeed. What you can see on the bottom row of that slide are the 15 priority investments that we're covering off in the report today and the RAG status for each of those. So what's great is we don't have any red RAGs there. We've got ambers and greens. So things are typically manageable within the project team or project governance board. If we just flick over into the next slide. So this is the red, amber, green guideline slide. So green, typically we're on track. What was signed up to, what was agreed to initially, is on track and able to be delivered and managed within the construct of the project team. Amber, successful delivery against the project parameters is feasible, but probably needs some attention, needs some management attention. The project is potentially in danger. So this is an early warning that something might be off track, and something's probably not going to be delivered, and we need to apply some mitigation to resolve. Red, typically in trouble. So we're not going to achieve something that we've agreed to. So this typically needs management attention outside of the project team, so wider governance to support to get back on track. So this is really where something is stopping the project from progressing. So sometimes you'll think something is red, but actually if there are mitigations in place and we're still operating within the action plan to try to mitigate, then we would be amber. If it's actually stopping the project from continuing against schedule, scope or budget, then it would be red. So there's quite a difference between the two, and there's quite a lot of misconception between the two. And then we move into the actual project report. So I'm not sure if everyone has read
Yeah,
through.
Pip, do you want to take some questions on that section? Anyone have any questions? Councillor Young.
Thank you.
And-
so, first one is, what does WOPC mean?
Whole of project cost. So we have.
No, I get it once you say the words. It's just
sorry.
the WOPC. I think, is that an event? Is that, it's like it's very confusing. I hate the use of initials, but it's a personal foible.
There's also whole of life cost, which is the cost beyond the delivery of the project, where we go into maintenance of the asset, operating the asset, the resources we might require, and so forth. So this is just whole of project cost to
That's
deliver.
just the abbreviations that are the issue, because we have so many. So on page 15, it's, there's a comment. So I'm struggling with my IT because I try to be, environmentally friendly. On page 15, there's a comment about the housing upgrade, and this may not be. This may be more for Siobhan. It talks about the general update, and it says it talks about the work streams, about the financial sustainability, work streams progressing with central government stakeholders. And then it says, once this is sorted, the program status will be able to move to green. It just seems once this is sorted is an incredibly casual way of a rather complex, difficult political situation. Like, once this is sorted is a pack of cards, or I'm tidying the cupboard, but...
Yeah, there are detailed mitigation plans in place, but we're not going to bring all of the detail to the forum, I guess. So this is a good opportunity to work through what level of detail you would require, and if there is any fear around some of those things being mitigated, we can actually go away and provide the detail for you.
Okay.
What it's good to point out here, though, as well, is that the Project Management Office is there to lift maturity of capability across the organisation. So we're trying to work through ensuring that the maturity of our project management and program management capability across the organisation is improved through working through better ways of managing projects through the different project parameters, whether it's risk, issue forecasting, scope management, planning, all those aspects. We're not going to be experts on every project itself. We're bringing information forward to you. So we can usually answer questions through, but we also don't want to talk on behalf of every individual project. But we do have some officers on hand to answer specific questions about projects here as well today.
Thank you, that sounds really good. And then the last question on this page is, this is about the Frank Kitts Park, with terrible name, terrible mayor. But it seems extraordinary that we're working on we've got, the Farley Trust is working to a different timeline to the City Council. Do you think perhaps we should be, I mean, I'm completely opposed to putting the Farley on the Frank Kitts Park, but that's incidental. It just seems to me a bit chaotic that we've got two organisations running on different timelines. You think we could at least get that in sync, or they could get it in sync? Or is it irrelevant?
Is in terms of having a program and a specific project?
Well, it just says here, it's about risks. Alignment of work streams continues to be a risk to the overall project timeframe as the Farley Trust is working to a different timeline to the City Council.
Which is why we're reporting it as a program, because there's moving parts within this program, and some of them are within our control, some of them aren't, and that's the risk. But by managing it as a program, that helps to manage that risk.
Do you think you just say to them, if you want us to work with you, you can stick the same timeline as us?
Well, that might be the final mitigation that they come up with. It could be anything, but what it is about here is about surfacing that is a risk. We need to continue to monitor it. We need to make sure we're aware of it, and we need to come up with options to address it, which is happening in the background. Because obviously we're aware that we need to get that aligned. So this is about surfacing it to you so you know that's happening. And certainly if there are options that the council can bring forward that can be taken back, that the team are working on that.
Thank you.
No worries.
First of all, welcome to His Worship the Mayor Andy Foster. Thanks for coming. Next, Councillor Fitzsimons.
Yeah, thanks for the very useful presentation. I've just got two questions. The first is around the Te Matapihi Central Library, and it says in there current cost estimates contain a limited construction escalation sum, so exploring alternative procurement methods. And there's been quite a lot of debate about approaches to procurement. So I was just wondering if I could have a bit of an explanation on that one.
I can probably explain that. Danny's not. Is Danny online?
Online, I think.
Is Danny online? No? Okay.
Yeah, I'm here. Look, and so alternative procurement, it almost starts from looking at the engagement of the early contractor involvement. So effectively identifying the main contractor early to allow them to look at buildability, at alternative ways, value engineering early in the process, rather than getting a detailed design process and then finding that the cost has escalated and it becomes a budget challenge. Other things are more when you look at procurement as you get into the phases, more construction phases itself, which would under PIP's IDF would be the actual delivery aspect, is where you start looking at how you procure your materials, so early procurement, advanced procurement, that sort of thing, so managing your procurement risks. So hopefully, Fleur, that gives you some insight.
Oh, well, that's a useful description of what it is, but what I'm wanting to understand is what is happening in relation, like what is happening in relation to exploring alternative procurement methods for Te Matapihi Central Library.
Yeah, and
so it's not early contractor involved. It's not the theory of it. I want to know what is happening in this instance.
Yeah, and so the process to appoint the early contractor is basically coming to a point where a decision will be made to select one of the candidates. So that procurement process has just about completed, and that appointment will be made shortly. So I think that's the theory and the reality of it's actually being done.
Okay, if I could get some more information about that, because I'm still not quite grasping what's different. So, but yeah, from what we've previously been advised, there's now exploration of alternative procurement methods. What is that? Because I understood early contractor involvement was the existing procurement method in relation to Te Matapihi Central Library.
So I think that comment around alternative procurement methods is relative to how we've traditionally done it in the past.
Oh,
so we're seeing more early contractor engagement because we need to de-risk these projects essentially and attract and ensure that we can manage costs through that approach.
Okay, my other question is around Frank Kitts Park Playground. So that was one of the key things that this council agreed we wanted to achieve as a group, and it's now getting, and it's had quite a fraught history, but it's now getting quite close to the deadline of September 2022. And I just want to check the key milestone on the third heading. It says conclude tender and negotiations with ADC and sign construction contracts December 2022. And I wonder if that's meant to be December 2021, given that the project's meant to be wound up by September 2022.
Yes, that's a typo.
Good news, thanks.
Well spotted, Councillor. Councillor Condi?
Thanks. I guess one of my questions kind of more generally is about how we get visibility in this report over changes to timeframes. So again, I'm kind of picking on St James Theatre just as an example. But in the report, we can see quite clearly that it's the whole of project costs, we're forecasting a 4% overspend, which is good. It's useful for us to be able to see that. But I can't see, looking at this, the fact that we are likely to deliver it, or are we likely to deliver it later than we were hoping to?
So the current agreed date is May 22, and whilst that's amber for schedule, so there is possibility of delivering it, probability of delivering in May, but there's a possibility that there's still risk associated with that. So it's not completely green, but we are on track, and that was the agreed new date. So whilst it has moved since the original date, once we agree a new date through governance, that needs to be the new baseline, and we need to start tracking our RAG status against that new baseline. Otherwise, the program will be red for its entirety, and we don't see early warning of new red RAG statuses across anything. So we need to, when we re-baseline, we sort of start again basically at that point and start tracking from that point, because we've agreed that whatever the original contract was in the business case, we've now moved, whether it's against schedule, cost or scope.
Yeah, and I get that, and it makes sense that we should, when we rebaseline, we have to start measuring against that. But what I'm saying is I would like to have visibility, like reading this, if I wasn't close to the project, I wouldn't necessarily know that we had rebaselined it.
Yeah, so you want to
And I
see
think
the
that's
original.
I think that's an important thing for us to be able to see at a glance.
So that's something we talked about after this was published, adding in the original budget and original schedule end date. Yeah,
because that's what we can see. Like I say, on the financials, we can see the approved budget and the forecast end costs, so we can see that.
Yeah.
But at the moment, we can't see the similar thing for the timeline.
Yeah, so I think we're going to put original for each of the parameters, which is usually we're recording against the scope, schedule and budget. So we'll do that for the next one.
That'd be helpful.
That'd be great. I also then just, I guess, have a question about how and what projects get included in the priority projects. One of them is just about there are no projects here from Wellington Water. First of all, is that just because they have their own project management thing and so we don't have oversight through this mechanism?
Yes, so we excluded them because they manage those projects and there's reporting through the quarterly report as well on those.
And then the other question I had was I was just looking at kind of roading projects, and there's a lot of cycleways in here, but I was sort of trying to think about the big roading projects that we have around, and the one that came to mind, for example, was Nio Gorge, which is a multi-year, multi-million-dollar project. So I guess I was just interested in, again, as just an example about why we decided that one didn't need to be in the priority projects, but some of these other cycleways projects did need to be in, because I'd just like to understand that.
Yeah, so in terms of that selection, ELT have selected which ones they think are priority based on their achievement of the priority objectives within the long-term plan. The reason why specifically Nio Gorge wouldn't be in there is that it is, whilst it's a resilience piece of work, it's high cost, but actually in terms of that impact, it's probably not as high impact as some of these in terms of visibility and political interest. However, so the purpose of bringing this report as a first report to this meeting is to really get feedback as to whether you think other projects should be in here. For instance, we're proposing that the paper you receive later on strategic waste, that we set the strategic waste up as a program and that will then be reported via this vehicle as well.
Well, I guess my question is then for those kinds of projects that are large but perhaps not priority, so they're not being reported on here, I guess it would just be a question of how are they being reported on and how do we see them and make sure that we kind of have visibility over them. So I don't necessarily have a problem with Nio Gorge not being on this list, but then it's a question of what oversight do we have?
So we've got over 100 projects that kind of meet the project criteria, and this is our first cut, so we're focused on the priority investment projects as an initial cut, but PIP's team will now be working on those other 100 projects which will be then reported through the quarterly report. So the intent is to start reporting those through the quarterly report from the end of this financial year, I think.
Yes. So the priority investments probably amount for about 70% of our capital investment. So getting those ticking over and working well is really our priority, but we are extending our scope and we are reporting on some others. We are capturing reporting. So for us, it's about having a repository of all data and then cutting and shaping it and providing different views to different audiences as needed. So we can absolutely bring more into the fold as well if it's decided that we need to extend that priority investment group, and also projects will be delivered, some will drop off, new ones will start, they will come in. So it is a fluid list and we will continue to evolve that. But as Siobhan said, it's really around scale and risk. So anything that's high risk or community impact. So it's not just the ones that are considered significant in terms of budget and size and multi-year. We are bringing others in that are have a big community impact or that people are really interested in. So we can absolutely evolve that as needed.
And Councillor Calvert.
Thank you, and it's good to see this sort of level of reporting. Would officers consider including some of the big Let's Get Welly Moving and water infrastructure projects in this?
Yes, so it would be a slightly different level of reporting, but we are in engagement with them and I am collecting information from Let's Get Wellington Moving and Wellington Water. So at the moment we're just trying to ensure we can get the right level of detail from them to be able to roll it up. But as Siobhan said, those projects are delivered or governed elsewhere, or we have a part to play in them, or we might own the assets. But because we don't own the delivery wholly and completely, we can't apply the same. we can't sort of make them use their IDF, that sort of thing, but we can absolutely collect information on their behalf and pull it in. It probably would be reported as a slightly separate subset because it's not the ones that we govern through Wellington.
Yeah, I suppose from a governance perspective, which is where we're at, we're governing ratepayers' money, or the rates that have gone into this, and so whether whether the council officers are controlling something or Wellington Water, which we own or partly own. It helps to how we can get that complete picture, and I just wanted you to take that feedback.
I think the CEO is going to make a comment.
Through you, Chair, yes, I thought it would be useful to just observe some aspect of the discussion we had. So for Wellington Water, the governing body is the Wellington Water Committee, and we have representatives on that committee. And so what we're trying to ensure is that we don't have multiple points of reporting to different governing bodies. The primary monitoring belongs with the appropriate body. In the case of Let's Get Wellington Moving, that is through the Let's Get Wellington Moving program and board. But we also make sure that we find other ways of keeping you informed through quarterly reporting or through briefings, such as the joint briefings that Let's Get Wellington Moving program hold for councillors. But we just want to avoid multiple points of governance monitoring and creating confusion, while respecting the importance of your feeling well informed about our part in those programs, if that helps.
Just an observation from me, Ms. McKerrow. Wellington Water do a quarterly update, and I don't think they would be too concerned about coming to us quarterly to give a summary of what's happening with Wellington City stuff. They really want to engage more as much as they can with us. I can't say the same for Let's Get Wellington Moving, but I know Rob Dunlop seems to be very open about things. So maybe we can have a chat because I do think Councillor Calvert has got a point that these big items of infrastructure are a bit of a gap in the otherwise excellent stuff that you guys are doing.
Yeah, look, I just feel we're quite fragmented, and there's the old saying, the whole is greater than the sum of all parts, and I'm feeling that we're looking at a significant part, but I'm looking for how does this all come together to tell a story, which brings me on to my next question. Why is this reporting out of sync with our quarterly reporting? Because what I'm seeing is we, again, as governors, have got to sort of make, we're monitoring the performance of the organisation. We've got other quarterly reporting, and now we've got this out of sync, and I can't understand why. When it does form a significant part of our spend.
It's just purely coincidence that this was when it was scheduled to come to Infrastructure Committee, which was booked in several months ago. We will align it to the actual quarterly reporting because at some point we will be working with planning and reporting to provide information across all projects. So it will be aligned. It's merely that this was the committee to come with the first one. So we decided to roll up the previous 3 months. Okay. And we are reporting monthly through to ELT on these, on this. So it'll just be cutting the data on a quarterly basis for this committee.
And can you tell, why is the district plan in here? That's a planning thing. And I just couldn't quite, it seemed to be the odd one out. And maybe I'm missing something because the other stuff is all very much infrastructure, planning or building something. The district plan is sort of slightly odd, and there may be rationale, but then if the district plan is here, would you not then include other major strategies? I don't know, but
It's because this committee gets stuff done, Councillor Carroll. That's why it's in here, right?
Yeah. Right. I don't know whether...
You've got a proper answer for that.
Yeah, a real answer.
Sarah Hay just said that's because I'm the odd one out. But no, look, I think this is just a series of, there's 15 projects here. They're all very meaty, sizable projects, and this is a big piece of work we thought you'd want to have some sort of eyes on. But to your point, Councillor, we do have the Councillor Working Group. We had a session yesterday with them, and we report very regularly to that. But it's really just the significance and size of the project. It is a multi-million-dollar, multi-year project as well, so that's why it's there.
And just one final question, the Tanaka one program of work. it's good to see it's green, and I know you can explain it as green, but I do the old sniff test, and I just don't get a sense, given what we know about resourcing capacity of the construction market and engineers. I mean, is that green?
I think Danny
still
will
current?
probably want to talk more to that, but it is about delivering to a point in time as opposed to the whole. So it's getting to that decision point as opposed to, you'll look at the budget, that it's only, it'll evolve into a wider project beyond a certain point in time. But Danny, you probably want to talk more to that.
Yeah, look, and so, I mean, you're right, Pip, that essentially what the Tonnage project is at this stage is around, what's reported here is around the decision around the mob and cab building and following through on the council decision through the LTP to seek the resource consent to demolish the mob and cab building. So the green there, Councillor Calvert, is really related to the work program to deliver the resource consent application by May 2022. So that's the building blocks that are the framework that you've approved, the conservation plan, the design brief for what would replace any building there, all of that work that needs to be done to support the resource consent application. So all of that work's on track to lodge the resource consent in May 2022. What then happens subsequent to that will be determined by the outcome of that process.
I mean, I wonder whether officers just could consider how they name these projects or programs, just to make it clearer that it's not the big thing. And I know when you look at the detail, but it's just, some people just read the top line, and I just think it might be helpful if we can refine the naming without making it too long.
Point taken.
That would be great.
We might split it into phases or something so that you're aware of which one, what's involved in each one.
That would be good. Thank you.
Ms. Kelly.
Thank you. I do have a question. I think it might have been answered, but I'll ask it again. I think our CEO provided the clarity I was looking for. I understand what the councillors are asking because there are a lot of projects, major projects that are going on within the city. But can you just clarify for me, through you, Mr. Chair, that for the purposes of this item on the agenda, this is about us noting the 15 projects that have been assessed by our officers as the priority and that meets the priority investment report for today.
Through you, Mr. Chair. I understand, but yes.
Good, thank you. So in terms of efficiency for our committee meeting today, because I can see that all councillors have read this paper thoroughly, could we take this paper as read so that we can move on rather than have a workshop?
Well, I'm not entirely sure what you're saying, Ms. Kelly.
Well, what I'm saying, Mr. Chair, is that this document, this report, is very well written. It's very clear what this item is all about, and councillors have asked some carefully considered questions. So, you know, the questions are happening, but in terms of efficiency for this meeting, because we're now on 20 to 11, can we take the report as read and move on and put the motion, because we've got a big agenda today.
Okay, Ms. Kelly, I understand where you're coming from, but from my perspective, this is the first one of these reports, and I think it's important that everyone is comfortable with it and that everyone understands that, you know, and has read and is comfortable with the ranking and the traffic light system and so forth. So I think it's appropriate we take a little bit more time today, because as we get into a routine of seeing how these reports are updated, it becomes much more simple, and we can simply take these things as read. But I would rather, for this particular occasion, spend a little bit more time. And you are the last questioner. We're going to have a cup of tea now, and then we're going to come back, and I don't believe there's any amendments, so the paper will be taken as read, and I expect there'll be warm support. But I'm going to make a speech too. So on that, unless there's any other questions, folks, We're going to have a cup of tea now. The time is, oh God, my eyesight. 10:37. Do the math. That's 8 minutes to. Is it 8 minutes to 37? 15 minutes. 8 minutes. 8 minutes. We'll come back at 8 minutes to the hour. paper, I just want to say, believe it or not, this is probably one of the most important papers that we as governors will see. It really does give us an opportunity to track what's happening at a high level. And I am thrilled with, dare I say it, the traffic light system, but also the neat summary. I think there's probably some, we can probably do a little bit more schematics or what have you, but I do like the summary. It gives us a great overview, and if we can get that every quarter, we will, be able to do our jobs much more efficiently. I was mentioning to Pip that, when we do find that things go into red, it's not a cause for necessarily concern or for wearing sackcloth and ashes. What's important is that we know that things possibly could go to red from amber, and events might come to pass that will mean that happens. And so what we don't want to see is things go into red unexpectedly, but rather we want to see things go to red. Well, we don't want things to go to red at all, but things do go to red for reasons that are predicted, and we have got plans to mitigate. So well done. I really appreciate the work, and I would like to see, and I will be contacting Wellington Water to see if we can coordinate with our other quarterly reports as well. So anyway, I will happily move this paper, and Councillor Condi will second.
Thank you. Yes, I just want to say it's really exciting to have this report come to the Infrastructure Committee, because I think the very first Chair's briefing we had for the Infrastructure Committee, and we sat down with Tom when he was still here, and I said, well, I want a report from the Project Management Office that takes us through, the priority projects that we're looking at, because it's a really important part of this committee's role. So it's fantastic to see it come here, and great to have, good questions and kind of feedback so that we can shape it and improve it so that it's meeting everyone's needs. But this is a really, as Sean said, I agree, it's a really important report, and it's great to see the work that's been happening on the Project Management Office come to fruition. And, it's something that certainly from an Audit and Risk Committee point of view, we've been following very closely and wanting to see this reporting be lifted up to this level. So it's great to see that we're delivering on that as well.
Any amendments? Any debate? Councillor Calvert.
Thank you, Councillor Roche. I thought you were asking me to second this, but anyway.
Councillor Conn. Seem more enthusiastic about it than you were.
Anyway, I'm very enthusiastic. As an ex-program manager, I love traffic lights and reporting like this. But also as a governance perspective, I just think we need to also make sure that, and I'm really pleased to hear that it's going to be aligned to all the other quarterly reporting, because we can't just look at this in isolation. We have to look at it in the big picture, and also understand the risks going right across our organisation, especially around resourcing and capacity, which we know is it's even a looming bigger challenge coming up. So happy to support, and I have no amendments because doesn't need any.
Councillor Fitzsimons, got any amendments? Okay, no one. Okay, Councillor Matthews is telling me to get on with it. All right, folks. Well, let's vote with the one or the two or the three as you choose. If you don't have your microphone on, no one can hear you. It's consigned to history. Okay.
Councillor Rush, can I just ask a question of process? Ms Murphy wants to be watching the next debate. Can they only watch by live stream? They can't be let back in, is that right? Yeah, okay, thanks.
I didn't vote. Yeah, okay. Mayor Foster not round? Okay, well, that's passed. Thanks very much, officers. And
Sean, Mr. Chair, I can see that the Mayor's voted yes.
Great. Okay. Right. Okay, let's move on to our next item, which is the strategic waste planning overview. And I'm guessing... Oh, sorry. Yep. Okay, I've got my own bits and bobs mixed up here. earthquake-prone buildings program. And Siobhan, you're going to take us through the report.
Yep. So I'd just like to introduce Hayley Moslin online. She's the manager of our earthquake-prone building team, and we've got Sophie Slater in the room as well, who's one of our legal team here to answer questions. This paper provides a summary of the recent survey that the team, Hayley's team, undertook on the 590 earthquake-prone building owners across Wellington City. It also describes the framework that we operate in, and one which sees the council as a regulator in this space. So one that determines on the advice of detailed seismic assessments whether buildings are earthquake prone or not. So over the last few years, there have been close to 6,500 assessments, of which 1,000 buildings were deemed to be, or over 1,000 buildings were deemed to be earthquake prone. Of these, around 500 have been remediated, leaving 590 yet to be attended to between now and 2037. And just under half of these have their notices expiring in 2027. So on expiry, council would need to take enforcement action, could include requiring demolition or strengthening. Legislation still relatively untested in this regard. So we're developing an enforcement policy so we can better be prepared to deal with enforcement action systematically if required. Just over 40% responded to the survey, and of those, most indicated that they did have a plan, which is really positive. However, we still don't have any real information of those 60% who didn't respond. So this survey will be shared with MB, and we're also proposing to investigate what would be involved in providing further incentive to owners.
Good. Questions? Councillor Pannett.
Thanks, Siobhan and team, for your work. Look, you may not be able to answer this now, Hayley, but I was just wanting to get from you how many apartment buildings have been done, and also how many priority buildings have been done as a result of our decision last training.
Hi. So how many buildings have been strengthened, apartment buildings have been strengthened over the entire program?
No, just apartment buildings?
Okay, yeah. I don't have that information right now, but I can definitely get those figures for you.
Hey, Hayley, are you able to turn your camera on?
Of course.
Okay, lovely. Thank you. Could you just email that to councillors, and also just the priority building ones which have got over the line?
Yeah, sure, no problem.
Now, also, I did ask Marty about those QV valuations. I don't think I got an email from him. Do you know if that, if he did get some information?
I know that he was working on it. We provided him with some information from the earthquake-prone building perspective, and he was going to give him some data, but I haven't had an update.
Okay, so again, if you could just send that on to councillors, this was just about whether there was a value uplift on earthquake-prone buildings. It's just always useful to see that happen. Just in terms of, thank you for negotiating on this amendment at number 5. So you're envisaging that any assistance would be in the thousands rather than the tens of thousands, and any bigger scale solutions to actually fix some of these problems would need to be done separately. Is that correct?
I can answer that, Hayley. So yes, the things we'd be looking at are rebates of corridor access fees, parking rebates in terms of when the work's actually getting done. So yeah, relatively low level.
And just last question, I have really strong concerns around the enforcement policy. I think it's only fair to enforce when the regulation was fair enough in the first place. So can you outline, apart from the answers that you've already given, about what actions are going to be taken against owners if they don't strengthen, because they can't afford to? That's generally the reason.
So Hayley, do you want to cover off what we're currently doing?
In terms of enforcement action now, or the policy?
No, what we currently do now, and then
what would be different
considering in the policy.
Yeah, so at the moment we have a handful of notices that are expired, and for 2 of those buildings, the most high risk buildings, we have taken those building owners to the District Court and High Court to seek approval to undertake the work on behalf of those owners and recover the costs after that work is done. And then we have a handful of other buildings, about 4 buildings that also have expired notices from 2012, 2013. So we're working closely with those owners. Some of those owners just need to get their paperwork through, their CCC issued, and we can uplift the notice. Others are just having issues with the engineers, so working closely with them. We have 2 other recent expired notices. It's just the priority part of the building where the time frame has expired. Again, we're working really closely with those building owners and the engineers. They're very close to getting that work done. So that's what we've how we've been working with owners to date.
And would the policy envisage evicting homeowners?
We haven't dropped down to that level of detail. That is one of the options under the legislation, one of the options that is open to council. There needs to be a risk assessment to determine whether the building should be occupied. It's not a straight, the notice is expired, everybody's out. There's decisions that need to be made and circumstances that need to be considered.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Deputy Mayor?
Yeah, I guess this is a really big problem actually, and I thank Councillor Pannett for constantly raising it, but I think some of the submissions we've had this morning, and in some cases these haven't been the first time we've heard from some of these people, but it has highlighted for me what a big issue it is. So the question is Wellington, like are other cities in New Zealand facing this as well? What's the scale of this problem nationally? And have we done any risk assessments what this might mean for our city if we can't find a way through?
So the legislation that we're working with now is a national legislation. So this covers the entire country from the top to the bottom. There is the government has looked at it from a risk perspective in terms of seismic risk. So if you're up in Auckland, then building owners have much longer time to. Councils have much longer time to actually assess their buildings as well as undertake assessments and strengthen buildings. I think it's nearly a 30-year time frame. Obviously, Wellington is a high risk seismic zone, so therefore the time frames for councils to assess buildings and therefore owners to undertake the work is much shorter, between 7 years and 15 years. So I guess the government is looking at it from a risk perspective across the whole country. Within Wellington, we might have some issues in terms of residential building owners being able to meet the requirements, and then other rural areas, other parts of the country have different challenges, whether it's the main street of a small town, but it has a lot of URM and not a lot of commercial activity to be support. So there is a broad risks that cover the whole country, and Wellington has a unique set of risks relative to where we are in the program and the types of buildings and owners that we're dealing with.
So you're saying that, if I'm understanding you correctly, you're saying that Wellington's been given a shorter time frame than the rest of the country. Have we been given the shortest time frame for our owners to fix this out of anywhere in New Zealand?
So there are other parts of the country that also have short time frames. So Christchurch, for example, Nelson, Tasman region is the much shorter time frames. So yes, so there's high risk, medium risk, and low risk. For example, Dunedin, they are low risk. They have much shorter time frames. But if you, I can share a map with you to show the different risk levels. So different time frames across the country in terms of seismic risk.
So I guess I am seeing this as an issue, actually. Do we have, I guess just maybe, is there any possibility we can get a little more information as councillors, maybe a workshop or something, on how other areas that have been given short time frames to respond, how are those other councils, what have they actually done? How have they helped their residents manage this? And maybe it's not a question you can answer now, but maybe I guess I'm suggesting, would it be possible to have a little bit more information and a workshop on this? Because it does seem to me this is a big issue.
Yes, we can take that offline and
Thank you.
come back to you.
Thank you.
Councillor Calvert.
Thank you. Obviously, things have got a lot worse since the 2016 quake, Kaikoura quake. What advocacy has this council been doing with government in terms of, this is broader than infrastructure buildings. But if I keep it to that, if you think about the water infrastructure, you think about insurance costs. So what advocacy has this council done with government to seek some support, given they've supported Christchurch, given they've supported Kaikoura and surrounding areas, and I understand we haven't had a dollar out of them for anything. So I see Barbara standing up, but yeah, what advocacy have we or are we doing with government on this?
Through you, Chair. So you may recall that we undertook a BIM or briefing for incoming ministers at the beginning of this term, and it covered a number of key issues about the city, including this one. Unfortunately, I can't speak for the Mayor, but I know that the Mayor has been in a meeting with the appropriate ministers to discuss various regulatory issues, including this one. I was not involved in those meetings, but the report back to me is that the discussion was good, but as you can see, at the moment our role continues to be the regulator, and we're doing our best to implement our role as it stands, while of course thinking about what this means for the future of our city, given the level of seismic risk and the associated insurance issues that go with it.
Any other questions, folks? I've got a few more low-level questions, I suppose, but I echo the sentiment of a couple of the questions there that this legislation is really putting Wellingtonians under pressure at a time when we need housing. And I note that the framework was set at a time when housing wasn't an issue in New Zealand, and it wasn't one of the things they thought about. So anyway, we can take that offline. I'm just wondering about the survey. I've had some comments saying that 40% wasn't a very good response. Was the survey one that was, I'm going to get this wrong, anonymised? And do we know that the owners, how many of the owners actually live in these places or are living abroad, if you like? For you, Hadia.
Yeah, of course. So the way we undertook the survey is, as officers, as the regulator, we are obviously dealing with our building owners. We are issuing notices, we're dealing with their engineers. But we acknowledge that, in order to understand our building owners better, we did actually want to have face-to-face conversations over the phone. So it wasn't a simple send it out in the mail and send it back if you like. We did really try to reach out and have individual conversations with every single building owner or owners that wanted to respond. But we did give them an undertaking that when the data is released, it's the individual responses, it's a collective of the responses. Sorry, what was the second question?
Well, I asked whether it was anonymised. So
yeah.
Did these participants, I'm just wondering whether they may have felt that by putting their hands up, they might be inviting a red sticker or something like that.
So I guess it wasn't anonymised in that we were wanting to talk to building owners to actually understand the issues. So that would be a case officer to building owner discussion. Okay. So they would know who they would be. Yeah.
Okay. Well, in that case, it's not a bad response, in my view. I did have a few other questions, which... I think I'm good. Any other questions, folks? Councillor Pannett, were you wanting to move the paper with an amendment to the substantive? No, it's included. Okay.
So first of all, I'd just like to say thank you to you, Councillor Rush, for inviting me to move the paper. I do appreciate your generosity. But my biggest thanks goes to Inner City Wellington, who have tirelessly advocated for owners. I have never seen lobbyists, community lobbyists, do so much. They have written, they have petitioned, they have made submissions. They've done an outstanding job. And I also want to thank the owners who responded to our survey. Our staff also have worked very hard to support owners, and sometimes we are talking about years of work with a single owner. We've just had one building off the list where it was a 10-year process for people to strengthen their building. Unsurprisingly, none of those original owners own that anymore. It's just been too difficult. And I do want to acknowledge that work. Every building off the list is a success. It makes our city safer. And so I congratulate the owners and the council for making that happen. However, we have a very, very significant issue, and I guess I have been frustrated that as we've had the planning for growth discussion, we have not been able to talk about earthquake resilience. It has been seen as an excuse or a side issue, and basic questions around safety and cost have not been addressed. We're talking here about that 400,000 figure that Inner City Wellington came up with in 2018, it will be more like $500,000 now. That is too much burden to put on ordinary people. And as we've got more people coming and living in apartments, we need to absolutely fix this. We have the most radical earthquake legislation in the world. No regulatory impact statement on the impact on owners. They did the worst job I've ever seen on an RIS. They just said it will be over to owners and no idea about costs or whether that was actually financially possible. I am generally not a fan of the ACT Party, but they were the only sensible person in the room on that debate in 2016 when they voted against this legislation. They should have. This council did support the legislation, but we were very clear that financial assistance needed to be provided to owners because we were very well aware that the costs were significant even back then. And it has been very difficult. We have done advocacy with the government, and so part of that, one of the small successes Inner City Wellington got through was a loan scheme, although, as I understand, no one's actually taken it up. I do think this submit is particularly for highlighting the human cost. Ms Kirkham can't live in this country because she can't afford to buy another place, which is a perfectly reasonable thing for someone to be able to do. And if you look at the survey information from Inner City Wellington, the amount of stress that owners are put under by having to take on a big civil project, which most of us, wouldn't generally have the skills or background to do, has been really, really difficult. So I think we just need to, I appreciate we've got a climate crisis and a housing crisis, but this is also another critical area. We are going to have a big earthquake. People are going to die, people are going to be injured, and we will have generations of Wellingtonians traumatised by the fact that not just by that earthquake, but the thousands of aftershocks after that. I'd like to thank officers for agreeing to this amendment number 5. I was very concerned about this approach, that we would take a wait and see approach. We've known for a decade about how difficult this is going to be to achieve a resilient city. So I appreciate that those words were taken off. I would personally prefer that we take a much more proactive response, but I will be meeting with senior members of this council. I'm grateful next week to just again have another go at looking at how we can support owners. I believe, as we discussed at the LTP, that incentives are critical. There's a whole lot of public safety benefits, economic benefits, cultural benefits from having a resilient city. The government has been really, really difficult on this one. They just cannot understand that it is not just about this group of inner city people in Wellington. It's about anyone that owns a building covered by this legislation and all future owners too. And if we want people to live in apartments, they must have safety and security, whether they own or whether they are tenants, of course, because any cost comes onto the tenant as well. I agree with the officer report that leaving the buildings may have a very negative impact. Council costs, life safety, hardship to owners. These are very, very significant issues. And just the last point I'd like to make is, like I said, I have really, really strong concerns around an enforcement policy, that we're talking about enforcing against people who just can't afford to do the work before we've done a complete suite of options to assist owners. And, I've been sort of in the weeds trying to, wriggle out $500,000 here or whatever, and we need much bigger ones, like buying land. Ms Hayward looked a little bit horrified when I suggested that, but we do need some much more comprehensive solutions, like, shared equity between owners and the council and the government, and FAP, as was done for leaky buildings. But let's talk about the solutions before we talk about enforcement, and I certainly echo Ms Murphy's concern that the enforcement policy is widely consulted on. That will be critical. So I think we've got some useful information. Thank you very much to the staff for doing that. That sits very well alongside the Inner City Wellington survey, and I look forward to bringing you some solutions next year in terms of some more smaller financial assistance, as well as some bigger solutions. Kia ora, and Councillor Rush will second. Thank you.
I was about to say I'd like to echo Councillor Pannett's, but I think it was too long, so but I just find it another hammer blow from the government onto Wellington at a time when we're struggling with our social housing, and we want to fund that. We want to fund our water. We want to fund our library, and now our residents are possibly going to be forced out of perfectly good homes that might come down in a force 8 earthquake, and might come down in a force 6 earthquake. I think that if I'm hearing it right, the no rush legislation, a knee-jerk reaction, bad legislation, and is now having a poor effect on people, Wellingtonians, and they're our responsibility. So I certainly support the amended motion, and would be looking to do a little bit more proactively in advocating for our people. Any debate? Councillor Calvert, then Free.
When I saw this number 5, Councillor Pannett, I thought, well, it's a bit wishy-washy and it's not really vague, specific enough. However, I accept that it's within the context of a regulatory aspect of what we're doing. And I think that's the big issue here. It's within the regulatory aspect, and we've actually lost sight of the big picture here and how we are actually taking into account not only this, but also the impacts that have faced the city, the 2013 quake, the 2016, what's happened in Christchurch, and really our city hasn't had anything from the government in terms of the impacts. Having said that, what have we done to put our case forward? And I'm not sure whether we've served Wellingtonians well enough in this regard. We've taken a bit of a piecemeal approach, the earthquake-prone buildings legislation, a bit about insurance, but I know advocacy, and I think the income-related rents for all group know this, is that you just can't go and make one submission and that's it. You've got to keep it going. And I wonder whether when this does come back to us as part of the annual plan, we really need to think about where our priorities are. As I said to Councillor Pannett, we can't keep adding more and more costs onto the city. We have to look at what we prioritise, and maybe we have to reprioritise slightly different. I know you're not looking very happy about that part, Councillor Pannett. But so it really does come back. We're going to have tough choices next year, and we're going to have to prioritise, and we're going to have to think very carefully right at that strategic level, and so that we stop fragmenting our responses and then really not making much of a difference. So I think there's some bigger thinking required, beyond what just this paper is representing. But Wellington is, whether we like it or not, is in a difficult seismic area, and I look about how we, even with our MPS and our district planning, and I'm talking about the MPS UD, whether we're really taking into account the issues that we have in our city and the risks that we have in our city. So anyway, I will be supporting this, but I think it's, and with the public participants, given us further food for thought about how we can actually run an effective advocacy program with the government.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Free. and then Condi.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Look, I think this has been a very useful meeting, actually, because I've been thinking for some time we've got two very, very big issues facing us, which we probably have only just started to grapple with, and that's our social housing and our, the earthquake strengthening of various private buildings, not only our buildings, but various private buildings in our city. And it seems to me, I really like what Councillor Pannett said, we've got to think big. Little $500,000 grants funds are a start, but they're not really what's needed here. And we do need a concerted approach to government on both of those issues. They're not issues we can solve by ourselves as a city. We really do need to think big and to think coherently about our housing stock. And it worries me a little bit that we are talking about a major change in how we build housing in the city, but we've got these pre-existing problems which we haven't really dealt with and don't really have a coherent way to deal with. And it's really clear to me this actually poses a big risk to our city unless we can address it. So I thank Councillor Pannett for the work she's done on this. I will be supporting her amendments. I will be supporting the paper, but I think this is just a start. We've actually got a lot of work to do here.
Thank you, Councillor Condi.
Thank you. I'm going to slightly paraphrase Ralph Manji, who was a Christchurch City Councillor. When he came to Wellington, he said that it felt like in Wellington we're having this slow motion earthquake. But this is an earthquake that's caused by these government regulations rather than the ground shaking or fault lines, and that we don't have any insurance payouts to help us fund the reconstruction. So it's really quite an interesting situation. That's being polite. I guess I was, so this is a big issue that we're going to have to deal with as a city. And I was very interested to see the number of building owners coming back saying they were considering demolition. Was 20% of those who had plans or had come back to us and said that they were considering demolition, which was 51 owners. I'm not sure if that equates exactly to 51 buildings, but that's still potentially a lot of buildings. And I agree that demolition can be a great opportunity for our city to kind of reimagine and take that opportunity to see some wonderful new development and great new kind of housing and green infrastructure and all the great things that we want to see as the future of the city. But as a council, we also need to think about how we're making sure that that is the future that we're going to look at, how we're going to support and make sure that that is the plan, because the last thing we need as a city is for all of those demolitions to turn into empty lots with at-grade parking, because that would be a really terrible outcome for the city. So it's also thinking about those owners who are planning to demolish, making sure that we're working through and that they have plans to reconstruct, and that the new buildings we have coming into the city are going to live up to the vision that we have going forward. So I think that's also another really important avenue for us to consider going forward. And again, I would like to also thank Councillor Pannett for bringing back this amendment so that we can look at some financial support, because I remember the debate when we were discussing the Building Resilience Fund and taking it out, and actually a number of councillors, including myself, who agreed to remove that funding. It was because we kind of felt like the amount of money was a drop in the bucket, and it was never going to be enough to make a difference to the construction costs of these projects, which are significant. And we actually really wanted staff to look at how we could provide other assistance, which is looked at in this paper, such as engineering or QS assistance, project management, as well as some of the other suggestions that are in the paper. It was that we just wanted to essentially repurpose that funding to that type of assistance. So it'd be great to see those proposals come back for the annual plan so that we can look at those for a decision. Kia ora.
Thank you, Councillor Condi. Councillor Young.
Just very briefly, I just want to endorse everything that Councillor Calvert said. This is a huge issue, but we have to stop doing more and more work and not working out who's going to pay for it, because actually the answer is Wellingtonians are going to pay for it. So I have absolutely no problem supporting this. The problems of earthquake-prone buildings is an enormous one, especially in the central city. But we have to start thinking about what projects we are going to cut, because otherwise the problem won't be the buildings. The problem will be there'll be no ratepayers here, because they will have gone off somewhere else where it's more affordable.
Thank you, Councillor Young. Councillor Fitzsimons.
Yeah, I just want to thank the officers and the public participants as well. I think what this paper outlines is what we already knew, which is that many buildings in Wellington are unlikely to be able to reach the deadline of 2027. There just simply isn't the labour force to deliver the change by then. And I do support aspects included in the paper like law reform for the ability for council to have a clear mechanism to recoup safety costs. I also think we absolutely need law reform to address the deadlines and the safety issues. I also think that we just need to have a bit of an honest conversation about where it's appropriate for ratepayer money from the collective to be spent on particular building owners. And I'm very clear that the council cannot act as a kind of insurance company or an insurance for building owners. And I know that there are residents in my ward who are facing issues around slips, around sea level rise and other things of a similar nature to earthquake prone buildings. And they don't have the same restrictions on them, but the safety impacts and the impacts on them as owners is just as significant. So I guess I'm interested in making sure that there are strong public policy grounds that justify collective funding to private owners, because it is a dangerous precedent to set. So I certainly support assistance with law reform. It's urgently needed. We must get that through. Also with the time frame, particularly on the time frames, also loans. I'm less convinced about ratepayer funding going directly to some of our ratepayers from the collective. So for me, it's just really a balance of understanding the appropriate role of the council in advocacy versus direct funding.
Well said, Councillor Fitzsimons. Councillor O'Neill.
Kia ora. I just wanted to add something to the conversation that hasn't yet been brought up, and that is that almost 50% of people living in Wellington are renters. And when we talk about the unfair cost of the pocket or the humble strain of somebody who owns multiple properties, knowing that the big one was coming for at least a decade now, that in reality, it's renters, it's people from my community that are living in yellow sticker buildings that get glass shattered down over them every time we have a shake. And kind of just to put out there that I do support the strengthening of earthquake buildings, but not to the cost of many Wellingtonians, when perhaps sometimes it might be better to demolish and actually build healthy homes. I disagree with some of my colleagues that this is a blunt piece of legislation, because actually that came out of an emergency situation. And what we have seen in Wellington is actually a lot of building owners have taken that remedial work to, secure parapets and facades on the outside of their buildings. But we also walk around Cuba Street, and in many places we've put up big shipping containers for people to walk under so that they aren't harmed because of the neglect of some building owners that are at a high earthquake risk. For lots of renters, a landlord money comes before its people that are living there. And with a housing crisis, it will be people that are the least well off living in these homes. So I just wanted to throw that into the debate, that actually I think 44% of Wellingtonians are renters and are experiencing this now. So it's not just the problem of, oh, sorry, we can't, I can't move back into my beautiful apartment in town that's from 1970, but actually other people, young people and people less well off that are occupying these homes, and that we openly acknowledge, like, oh, I'm off to the yellow sticker, like, hope I make it another year. That's no way to live here in Wellington. So I am supportive of the paper. I'm supportive of the piece of legislation. And I just wanted to throw out there that renters will probably have their lives most affected in terms of their physical, immediate life during a big shake like this. And then the pocket of people comes next.
Thank you, Councillor O'Neill. Mayor Foster.
Yeah, look, thanks, Chair. I just wanted to start off by saying my thanks to officers and also to the submitters, to officers to the paper, obviously, but to submitters. And look, the comment was made earlier about the inner city Wellington work that's been done over many years. in terms of advocacy, but actually I also want to say in terms of the amount of research that has been done, particularly by Geraldine, but by Inner City Wellington has been really impressive. So I want to acknowledge them for that. And also to acknowledge the huge stress, emotional and financial, that the situation in which many people, through absolutely no fault of their own, have been put in. I know that there's been a lot of focus on the legislation, but I think, and this is always the dangerous thing about trying to talk down the risks in Wellington so that our insurance comes down, or to talk up the risks because the risks are there. But if you look at the combined risk of those potential earthquakes which are listed in the paper, if you do the maths on that, there is a 92% chance that over the next 50 years we're going to have one of those. And I haven't tried to work out what the maths would be on having more than one of them, but the chances that we have a major earthquake in our, in that 50 years it's not inevitable, but it's not far off it. So one of those things is very likely to happen. And so I guess what I'm saying is that the risks actually are real. And I know we're told that the risks of dying in an earthquake are much less than the risks for many other things, traveling on the road, etc. But they are nevertheless real, not only to life and limb, but also to the built fabric of our city and its functionality. We're not in a position which we can do what Christchurch did. I don't think anybody expected Christchurch to have earthquakes. We looked at the building stock they had there and went, we can't possibly have earthquakes if you've got that kind of building stock and it's still standing. But when there was an earthquake, of course, they didn't have a central city like ours. The central city had already been essentially pulled apart by developments out in the suburbs, and they were able to go out to the suburbs. We don't really have that luxury. We're also the headquarters of the country in terms of the government. And so it really is important that we as a city are resilient. We've taken a leadership role in that over several decades. In fact, I can remember going back some years where there was a presentation to a local government conference, and Wellington City had done as many assessments of buildings as every other authority in the country put together. So we're taking it seriously because we have to take it seriously because we know that we're in a high risk area. So just wanted to also just to note from the workshop which was live streamed yesterday, the audit and risk one, of those risks. Now there was one column there that, if you can recall, had a major seismic event there. Low probability, but it had a whole lot of severe impacts on it. Most of the others had one severe impact or two at most, and that was even in the construction area, which we thought is the biggest. We know it's going to happen. But there were a whole lot of severe impacts which were put against that seismic risk. So the risks to the city are real. What's been done? I've heard a number of the questions there. Obviously, we've had ongoing discussions with government. I would acknowledge we probably need to have more of those to be more pushy. It would also be quite nice if they actually responded to those. And I agree with the comments that have been made, is that when we're trying as a city to deal with an earthquake before it happens rather than after it happens, and in a sense we get punished for that because we don't get the support that other cities have had or other districts have had when they've had an earthquake, and then government goes and helps rebuild. So it'd be really nice to get some of that. Government has, though, one bit that has not been raised or noted is that government has increased the EQC ceiling for the residential sector. I think the commercial sector desperately needs some assistance in that area as well. They've been quite clear in saying that the cost of insuring a building in Wellington is 10 times the equivalent building in Auckland, and that obviously is a significant challenge to our economy as a city. The other thing I just wanted to mention is that there's ongoing work on the RPS, the resident funding arrangements, and that we've got government involved in that. We've also got all the major TAs, I think, are involved in that as well. That's being worked through by our Chief Financial Officer, and I think that at least is a helpful funding tool going forward, because at least we can borrow at a relatively cheap rate of money to be able to support, a relatively cheap rate of interest to be able to support development. So things are happening. They are happening probably slower than I think we would all want, but we need to keep on doing that work. And so I think the hands-off approach is not the right one. I think we do need to be hands-on, and we do need to be keeping on advocating for this, lobbying for it. and asking government to support their capital city possibly a little more strongly than they have been to date.
Thank you, Worship. Ms. Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have listened really carefully to the debate this morning, and I have to say that I am really amazed and astonished that that we've not been able to get any support whatsoever from central government to assist with the earthquake strengthening requirements that are needed here in this city. I'm actually really appalled. And I have to say, there's a couple of points that I want to make. My husband and I were looking really seriously about a year ago at apartments in Wellington, because we thought this would be a really good place to live. It wouldn't be too far away from our muckles and our kids. They could come and see us. And we were looking at apartments, and we found a couple that we really were interested in purchasing. And then I found out about the corporate body fees and how they were just ridiculous, the cost of them, and it was because the earthquake strengthening stuff was all incorporated into it. So we flagged that idea and we're staying where we are. But my concern in listening to the two submitters this morning on this matter, to actually understand the depth and particularly the financial impact that it's having on the residents of the city, whether they're home owners or renters, because the reality is that if the homeowners, and I guess that was the question that you were alluding to, Councillor Rush, when you asked how many of these buildings are they actually owned or rented, whether they're owned or rented, it really makes no difference, because if the owner's not living in it, they're renting it. So we're housing people in these homes, and that makes it important in this current climate where we have such a housing shortage. Which then brings me to the point that Councillor Condi made. Around 51% of the people that were surveyed said that they would rather demolish their properties than have to meet the cost of strengthening.
51 owners, 20% of people.
Oh, okay. Well, that's still a lot of. That's still a lot of homes that are potentially. We don't know what the size is. There's still a lot of people. But I guess the point that I was trying to make is that we're in this environment right now where we have a real shortage of homes, and we know that this government is really focused on trying to address this issue, because they have to, because we've got so many people that are homeless, and we need them in homes. And so I am just thinking, while you guys were debating everything, that if we were to go to government, because I do support what Councillor Colvert said, that we need to make really strong representation to government, that they need to come to the party and help financially. This is not something that the ratepayers of Wellington City Council should be funding themselves, because all we have to do is look around the rest of New Zealand where the earthquakes were hit, and they were substantially funded from central government. So what I'm thinking is that based on what Councillor Colvert has said, and also that we're here in the capital, right next to the Beehive, and we also have councillors on Wellington City Council who have alliances and who run under the current government ticket. So they, they've got an avenue to go and to advocate for this to happen. So I think when you bear in mind all of those factors, I think we're in a really strong position to be able to advocate really strongly and really clearly that we need support, and of course our mayor leading it. But while I was thinking about this, because this amendment, while I don't normally support things that vague, and they're broad, let's say they're broad, because I'm mindful that that's another lot of work that potentially would go to our officers. I do support this. I support this wholeheartedly, but rather than be a part of the problem, I'm thinking of a solution. So this is in no way trying to tell our officers or councillors what to do, but what I do know is that there is an act that went through Parliament. It's called the COVID-19 Recovery Fast Track Consenting Act 2020, and that potentially would give us an opportunity if we were to go to central government, to Megan Woods or whoever you think, but if you were to go there, and why we need this under urgency is because we've got a housing shortage, and because of these regulations that are being put in place to strengthen our existing buildings that need to be strengthened. And remember, the existing buildings, we have got 51 of them, or whatever the thing is, we've got 51 of them that is potentially saying they're going to knock them down. Well, if you would go to Minister Woods and say that, she'd be wanting to come to the party in some way, I believe, because that would cause another headache that the government do not need right now. And I'm telling you that under COVID-19, the funding under COVID-19, it's available, let's say, it's available, but under this act, that would be how our officers and our elected members would be able to get this in front of government and be able to get it in front of those. And I'm not saying this, to try and do your work, I'm just putting it up as a potential option, which is what this amendment is saying, to investigate some options. So I support this, and I just am blown away that Wellington City has not received any funding whatsoever.
Thank you.
It's not good.
Ms. Kelly, yes, Councillor Condi.
I just wanted to speak very briefly to say that is nearly correct, but not entirely correct, because there was a government fund for unreinforced masonry buildings, which this building owners in the city were able to access. That said, it was $4.5 million across the whole country. So it's not a lot of money. But technically, we did get that little bit of funding.
So let's not minimise the issue, because the issue here, I believe, is that we need to get in front of central government, and we need our mayor and we need our elected members to get in front of them and go and advocate for the people of the city, because they can't. That's ridiculous. I know, because I wasn't prepared to pay for that. I wasn't going to buy into that, so I'm staying where I am.
Procedural motion, can we put the motion, please?
Yeah, I mean, we've got right of reply coming, Councillor Matthews. Thank you. And thank you for the debate, folks. A few messages there we can take offline as a council. Councillor Pannett.
Well, thank you for the vigorous debate. Really appreciate it, and appreciate the support. Advocacy has been happening, and in fact, very recently, and the Minister was not prepared to help. So, anyway, we need to do some more work. And look, that's why I did find the debate on the BRF very difficult at LTP time. We had some money in the pot, and then it's a bit difficult to go to government and say, well, we took ours away, but can you give us some money? And we have obviously looked over the years at some mechanisms to support owners, but it just always finds these problems. And I'd also just point out that the last council did make some things difficult, exercised regulatory powers around priority buildings, which were very, very, very broad, practically the whole of the central city, and I didn't think that was particularly helpful. Yeah, Councillor Calvert, the advocacy has been relentless. I mean, like, honestly, of course we know that people have to keep going, and we have tried to do that. And I'm glad to have people's support for bigger thinking than, the money that we have been looking at in the past. That would be incredibly helpful. The links to the MPS, I just think that is irresponsible for the government to have failed to look at earthquake issues in relation to the MPSUD, and that still needs to be fixed. Councillor Condi, look, I decided not to be irritating and put up an amendment around advocacy. I think we want to do good amendments, but I did think we needed this one in because we needed to make an actual deliberate decision. They were going to come back in June. I said, no, we need something for the budget. Councillor Young, this is always the question. Irrespective of who's going to pay and what projects we're going to cut, we have a massive problem coming at us like at the speed of a very fast freight train, and we will all pay if and when there is a big earthquake and people are killed, or when people lose confidence in the city because they think it's just too dangerous to do anything. Councillor Fitzsimons, I agree, many of these building owners will not be able to make the deadline. The labour force isn't there, but more importantly, the cash is not there. The Labour government will not make change on the legislation. I hope they will now listen a bit more, that there is some sympathy for needing some reform. In terms of ratepayer assistance, I am consistent on this, and you will note from, of course, remember from the debate on city housing, I am prepared to put ratepayer funding into city housing, and unfortunately I was denied permission to put that on the table. I think we need to look at, in rational terms, assistance for all sorts of people. We will have to do it for owners impacted by climate change, and slips, absolutely. And of course there should be strong public policy grounds, but they are very, very strong here. When there is an earthquake, people die, and we need to do everything we can to stop that happening. Nearly there. Councillor O'Neill, I did mention tenants, and I just encourage you to try and get to know our owner community. These are ordinary people for the main. They are not owning multiple properties. These are their homes, and they haven't got $500,000 to strengthen them.
Investment properties.
So I think just, and I did mention that tenants, of course, will pay the cost. If you have a $500,000 bill, then they're going to be helping to pay for it if that is the situation. And yeah, Ms. Kelly, I'm surprised that you are amazed that the government won't help. They just won't. They come up with a loan scheme, but they won't dish out the cash because they essentially consider that this is the market to deal with. If you can't strengthen, tough luck, the market will come in. So essentially that's what would happen. Ordinary owners will probably not demolish a building and then rebuild it. It's too difficult. You sell it to a developer and then they do it. But I agree with you. It will be an absolute headache for the government if we are seen to be evicting people from their homes in 2027. Thank you.
Well, thank you. The motion's been moved and seconded, so I invite you all to vote. Good debate. You're moving this one, aren't you? Did you put an amendment in the end? And that's been carried. Thank you very much, everybody, for your contributions in that debate. I think there's some strong messages that officers and perhaps the government might take away from it. Moving to the next item, 2.3, Strategic Waste Planning Overview. Again, Siobhan will introduce the report.
Thank you. I'd like to invite Emily Taylor-Hall and Emma Richardson. Oh, am I allowed to invite them, or can I just introduce them? I'll just introduce them. They're from our waste team, and they'll be here to answer questions on this paper. It might be an idea to come up to the table, seeing as there's two of you. Okay, so this paper positions the strategic waste review, which was presented in the middle of October to this committee, and it really positions it within the context of our waste minimisation and management plan, which is our operative plan. It requests we report back on this with our waste minimisation and management action plan and investment plan in October 2022 to allow sufficient time for us to have meaningful engagement and co-design on this plan with interested parties. It describes the process for the development of the waste minimisation management plan, and it asks Council to agree that we agree to work regionally on this plan, and provides an overview of the strategic waste programme as a whole.
Your office is going to speak.
I can take it as read it. Or, yeah.
Yeah, happy to take the, any questions, colleagues? No? Good? Okay. Councillor Pannett.
So we went through the process of a regional plan together, as you know. What are your reflections on why it's been so difficult to get some movement? I mean, obviously the bylaw's been a really great success, but we did have a program and it hasn't been easy.
I think that the joint committee, our recent joint committee, prioritised our actions from a regional perspective, and the initial action was to establish the bylaw. Now that's taken a number of years to deliver, but the 8 TAs have done that, and that was really important because we needed to create a regulatory framework that we could use in the future to deliver on future actions. The other key action, I think, is implementation of National Waste Data Framework, and that is licensing. That work is underway. Again, that's a big project and we're working regionally, scheduled to be in place in 2023. The third priority is resource recovery, and I think that we can see now that each of the TAs in the Wellington region have taken steps to deliver on this regional action at the local level. At Wellington City Council, you have a paper coming up in March, which will be the first critical step for you in setting the strategic direction for resource recovery. And I think that they were the top 3 priorities, and we are actually in line with delivering them. And there are other actions, but we focused on our priorities, and that's what we're delivering.
Councillor Foon, I think you had a question.
Yes, I just wanted to get clarity on what Mr. Payne was asking us this morning. I think that would be good to give a good steer on. And so what he was asking, was there the possibility to slow the process down so that we could do the things we wanted to do and but do the co-design process with the community as we decided on October 14. But what he was asking, is there a way that we could do an interim consent process for 26 to, just to stop the speed at this end? So is that clear enough?
So you're talking about like a smaller consent?
Yeah, just to bridge until what they were asking for was to do the waste minimisation co-design first to help reflect on what the residual waste outcomes could be.
Not really in terms of timing. So whether that sort of residual waste design and consent process is still going to take a reasonable amount of time, and we need to kind of be making decisions on what we want that option to look like now. Otherwise, there'll be very few options available to us, and most likely having to export our waste will be the only one left on the table. So we really need decisions on that residual waste option first. I know that's not ideal timing in terms of, obviously, in an ideal world we'd wrap up the sort of waste minimisation program at the same time, but unfortunately timing is just slightly off.
Beth, do you have a comment on that?
Yeah, I just sort of wanted to add further to what Emily said. So the October 14th paper showed that irrespective of the waste minimisation efforts, we are going to have residual waste that we need to deal with, and that's the rationale that we have for moving forward with the landfill extension in some form. We are looking at what we can do in terms of consent, but it's likely that a longer term consent is the most realistic option, with the key rationale being that scalability is a big determinative in the decision-making process, so that you may have a longer-term consent, but you may not have to use it. So that you may not build to that and you may not fill to that. That's the ideal perspective, and that we can go up and down as needed. So just wanted to clarify that too.
If I could add to that, I was just talking to our landfill engineer about this, and he basically said, and Rob Hon is at the back there, he basically said that we will be essentially full capacity on our existing consent, and airspace is an issue. So there's only a couple of months scope in terms of we maximise our consent. There's no sort of bridging consent. We will need to build another landfill. There's no room left to establish a bridging consent because we don't have the space.
Thank you. The Mayor Foster.
Another one, but when you're
Yeah, look, thanks. 3 quick questions. So just on the landfill, just to finish that so you can be absolutely crystal clear, what you're saying is that 2026 we run out both of consent and of physical space.
correct.
Correct, cool, thank you. That was my understanding. Second one is just, could you give us a bit of a heads up on where government is at with its thinking? I mean, there's quite a lot of focus there on curbside recovery. Where the government is at in its thinking around legislation in respect of various different containers and that sort of thing, because that would obviously have a profound effect in that area, and it's been hanging around for a while.
In terms of legislation, they have recently released the public consultation document indicating they will review the Waste Minimisation Act and the Litter Act together. There is some detail in that, but most of it's very high level, so they haven't released any detail at this stage. I think 3 years is probably a realistic time frame to be receiving a draft on that. And then the strategy is the same. So we have some level of detail in terms of what they're thinking, and then the rest is high level. So there's a huge work program happening at central government level, but no certainty yet.
Okay, and thank you. And look, the final one is under 50.50, there is a comment there about regionally investigating and feasible developing region-wide recovery facilities for processing of organic waste. Is there any way in which we can co-locate that with sludge treatment, given that they're both, biological material? In other words, something can do both of these together.
Are you talking about the sludge minimisation facility, co-locating them?
Yeah. Well, not so much co-locating, but a plant that can do both.
No, we're a bit too far down the track in terms of what that sludge minimisation facility is able to do to make those kind of design changes at this point in time.
So you're saying it can only do sludge, can't do anything else?
Yes.
If I may add to that, I think in terms of the organics processing facility or an organics processing facility in the future, potentially it doesn't just have to be a Wellington City Council facility. It could be developed by another TA and then utilised by Wellington City Council. So there are options.
Thank you.
Councillor Foon.
So just following on from the last question about the order of the questions we're asking the community. So what we'll be asking the community when we go out with residual waste is what system should we be using to dispose of our residual waste ahead of how will we reduce our waste in the first place. So the question is, will there be some communications alongside this engagement or consultation wherever we get to help the community understand that we've got a problem?
I can answer the first part of that, Laurie. In terms of what we're trying to decide in the immediate to meet our resource consent timeframes is what is the preferred option for landfill. So the work that's been done to date and the general agreement across the working party that's been established, and you heard it from Martin as well, is that there's recognition that there will be some form of landfill required to deal with residual waste. So in order to meet the requirements to ensure we don't run out of space, we need to pursue what that option is, what the preferred option is, and the time constraint for that is driven by our annual plan process, so we will need to go and consult as part of the annual plan on that. The consultation, in terms of your second part of your question, I'm thinking you're talking more around the comms plan. So this will be established as a programme of work, and that will be reported on as part of the priority projects, but alongside that will be a comprehensive communications plan developed as well. But remembering that the intent is to co-design the waste minimisation plan with those stakeholders as well.
Can I ask just a question. A lot of the focus of the paper is what the council is doing in terms of when we get waste. What are our residents doing to actually minimise their footprint in the space, and are we providing support for them?
Yes, and that's a valid point because the landfill only takes the waste that's already produced. So we have a waste minimisation team which has a real focus on behaviour change and working with communities and residents about how they can reduce their waste footprint. But it's slow and takes time.
And I think the other dimension to that is the curbside review coming up in terms of we can optimise our systems so that residents can reduce their waste through utilisation of the curbside system. So that will be something reported on. So you'll get to make some decisions around that, and we'll begin considering it in March.
And where's the organic uplift project?
The organics project will be modelled as part of the modelling reported back to you. The next stage will be to investigate options for commercial industrial organics processing, and we'll do an investigation in that from a Wellington regional lens, so what's appropriate or might be appropriate for us, and that will eventually, with to the agreement, or if appropriate, according to council, will lead into business case development work or working with another TA in the Wellington region to further that.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. All right. Oh, sorry, Councillor Calvert. Would you like to ask a question?
Yeah, look, I'm just interested in why this report's come to us, and it's, because I see you're reporting back to us in March and then in a 12 months time, and everything's a lot of noting, and I'm just wondering, why is this in front of us?
I think that at the October meeting there was misunderstanding, and that's probably I apologise, it's probably an officer's issue in terms of the reporting lines, in terms of the role of the waste minimisation roadmap and what that represents and how that would be utilised. So it was always intended that that be utilised to inform the development of the next WMMP, and that it wasn't a plan in itself that we could give effect to and operationalise. So this report really provides clarity on the WMMP plan-making process, and currently we're committed to working regionally, but you have a choice as a council if you want to continue the avenue or develop your own WMMP. So we really wanted to clarify a few things and let you know what was coming in terms of the work ahead, and get your agreement on the regional process or agreement on whether to work at a TA level to do a next plan.
Okay. So following on from this, the report back will be under the normal quarterly performance monitoring, is that correct?
That's correct.
Other than there's a specific key
That's
thing.
correct. And then alongside that, the individual project reports coming through.
And how will they be reported back, through quarterly reporting or through the priority investment reporting report?
So the program will be reported in the priority investment report. So when we align that to the quarterly reporting, you should see it all at the same time.
All right, because I feel it's a bit Groundhog Day at the moment. Yeah.
Okay, well, I just had a look to see if anyone else online wanted to speak, but all I can see now is the back of my head. Took ages to sort that out. Okay, well, that's the. Thank you very much, officers. I think we've had the Q&A, so the paper's been moved and seconded. Well, no, it hasn't been moved yet. Yeah, okay. Councillor Foon, you're going to move it.
Don't make it feel any more like Groundhog Day, Councillor Rush.
Sorry, did you say it's like Groundhog Day? What, like Groundhog Day? All right. I will be enforcing the 3 people in support. We're going to go for it.
Yeah, and thank you. I will use my right to speak. Taken me a few years to get here, and I will go for it. Thank you, Councillor Rush, for allowing me to move the paper, and thank you, Councillor Pannett, for seconding and for your wonderful work in the past that's got us here today. And it's another great meeting where we're talking about waste. This is my second, third or fourth one this week, so there's a lot going on. But yeah, that is because there's a lot going on, and as we've heard, there is urgency and there is a challenge for this council and our city that, as Martin put it this morning, we are reaching a perfect storm. So I do thank the officers, because there is a lot of work going on behind the scenes, you know, on many levels. But as Officer Proctor has reminded us, there are a few asks and not so much noting in this paper. And actually, I do have a few amendments, so maybe, thank you, Sean, if you could just scroll up, just in case there are any questions on these. But I'll do my, just do this, and then if there are any questions, people can come at them later. So basically, this question is asking, the paper is asking us to reaffirm our regional commitment. Now, I must say I really grappled with this over the weekend when I read it 3 times, that this was what the paper was asking us to do. And there's no doubt that there are pros and cons to working regionally. On Monday, I checked in with the other councils, and it was great to hear that they are very supportive of continuing to work in a regional manner, and that is beneficial to them, and it is a steer, and we do support each other in the initiatives that are taking place. So the pros, and it makes sense to work across the region because many of our other work structures are going that way. Also, we have achieved consistency, as Emma outlined before, and we've done great work in the bylaw and consistent publications on events, waste planning and waste minimisation, materials in the C&D sector. So all of these have come through the waste bylaw. And we also have more chance of funding from MFE if we work as a region. But the cons are it generally takes time. It is a very slow moving beast. Wellington City carries a lot of this mahi from our officers, and it's hard, and going forward, we may not be able to be as ambitious with our plans as what we were outlining that we wanted to be on October the 14th. And I guess for me, there is a really big question on the genuine intent of other councils to really wanting to reduce waste. I, along with Councillor Rush, sit on the Pūroro Joint Committee, and I witnessed at a publicly excluded session that there was a commercial deal done to encourage reduced prices for a commercial dealer to only use Pūroro, and also that in another session that there is their second landfill extension since I have been on this committee, and that particular extension will run through a tributary of a stream that will run into the Pūroro harbour. And so there's not really a great, while we're all working and we all have to own our situation, there is actually, it is hard, and there is not great intention from some of the other councils, and maybe perceived Wellington City Council as well, to actually really try and meet these targets. Councillor Pannett, thank you for asking, has this been effective? Actually, we really don't know yet, because a lot of the work we're doing is foundational and strategic and around data collections, but just checking in with all the other councils on Monday, everyone's waste is increasing, apart from Wellington's, as you can see in the report in this paper, where we are pretty consistent. And possibly the reason for that is, yes, we have a bit of waste flight going on to other landfills around the region. So to conclude, it's yet to be seen in the next report if it's actually working. But in the end, I've decided that it's better working together, and that we might be best to look at a trade-off around ambition, and as advised, that we can, as a local TA, set our own goals and we can look to exceed our targets. But I haven't really seen many projects exceed their targets regularly. So, and as Martin said, whatever we do, we can't get to the end of another 10 years and not have had made any progress. So the amendment I'm bringing here to strengthen this is an amendment 15, which is around just reviewing the terms of reference and the role of the Regional Waste Minimisation Committee in the next term when we go out with the new plan that's coming to us. So happy to answer any questions on that one. Number two, one of the other things I want to talk about here is action. We can see through the report, and we've heard from Emma also this morning, that there is lots of planning, lots of investigation, lots of business cases, but we really can't see any strong action coming from Wellington City Council. And this is what hard is, the community can't see what we're doing behind the scenes. They can't see the infrastructure going in to support the behaviour shift. So if we can't do it, I think the right thing to do, and I have been saying this for a while, we should enable the innovation that's happening in our community through giving more funds, which we have put in the annual plan in 2020, a motion moved by Councillor Fitzsimons and myself, and another moved in the long-term plan to give more of the funds coming in through the Waste Minimisation Fund and put that out through the Seed Fund. And so amendment number 14 is about bringing a policy to help this actually happen. We've got the money. We actually made $1,600,000 profit at the landfill last year, and we've got $13 million sitting in the account. We need to do something. We need to get moving. Let's give it to the places that can make a difference. Just another noting, especially for Councillor Calvert, amendment is on resource recovery, but this is actually for our community. The regional committee also noted they are very concerned about the C&D waste growth throughout the region, and that we need to start doing something about this. So this is to confirm that this is Amendment 11 that will be coming through the resource recovery business case that we'll start to see next year. And so the third point I want to make is the timing, and specifically around Amendment 10. Thanks, Sean, if you can just scroll up. While I support all of the other recommendations in this paper, I've decided that I cannot support Amendment 10. Just reading this over the weekend was the hardest pill to swallow. I get the practical reasons why we can't achieve this, but what officers are asking us to do is that we need to, whatever comes out of the co-design review, because of timing, that can't come out till October 22. This will not constrain Council's ability to consider residual waste management options in early 22. The reason why I'm here is about this particular issue. It's been going on for many years, so I cannot agree with that recommendation. Because what we are doing is we are going out to the community to ask what system shall we use to dispose of our waste before we ask them how will we stop making our waste. And by asking the what system question, we are giving people permission to carry on. And I respect that the council is in a timing bind, but we have been slow to act, so I will not be supporting recommendation 10. And just to finish, can I have the images up on screen, please, from the Pūroro community yesterday? These are images from the Pūroro community. I said I would share them with you. They have been cleaning up their beach after the rainstorms we had earlier this week. There are images of polystyrene balls which are virtually impossible to clean up before they go into the marine environment. There are images of another waste, there's a few more of, the waste on the beach after the storm from the stream, and more on with a waste bag of the amount of waste they cleaned up from the stream. What this community is asking and what I am asking is please stop the abuse on our taiao. Please hurry and play our part, your part, to change the system. Kia ora.
Thank you, Councillor Foon. Councillor Pennant, would you like to?
Very briefly. So, very briefly. So, look...
Councillor Young, that's unnecessary.
Yeah, actually, it was actually...
It's really, I don't care.
Quite...
She's allowed to, and she was speaking passionately.
Councillors are tweeting. That's actually quite rude. Okay, so I just want to thank Councillor Foon for her amazing leadership. without you, we wouldn't be making so much progress. So thank you, and I know how much work that you've done in that. So I was very happy to listen to your speech. Look, I just want to reflect, Councillor Foon and I had a discussion over the weekend about this issue of working regionally versus locally. It's a very difficult one because I do feel, to be honest, we were dragged a bit down to the lowest common denominator. But nevertheless, some of the solutions around waste must be dealt with it regionally. So if we were talking about, say, for a composting facility, it would not make sense to just do it for a city. And saying that, I think we get the balance right, not by lessening our ambition, but by making the local actions a lot stronger and maybe the regional ones just a little bit more confined if you're struggling with that. And just remembering, of course, that regional governance group doesn't have any power really, so you are still subject to the councils. But thank you very much. This is great. I can't wait to see the resource recovery business case. I got agreement for that in 2018, so 2022, it's going to be fantastic. Kia ora.
Good. I will speak in support of this and thank Councillor Foon for her hard work and her advocacy in the Pūroro Forum and of course here as well.
Thank you. I just want to speak strongly in support of number 10. Shauna, if you could flick our screen up so we can see 10. Just that I acknowledge that Councillor Foon wants to take a stand and vote against this, but that it is actually really important that I encourage us all to support number 10 because it is essential that the resource consent process around the residual waste management options include the landfill extension, do progress in early 2022. If they don't, we are potentially setting ourselves up for a situation where we run out of landfill. And while I absolutely acknowledge that doing these two consultations in that order is not ideal and it is not what we would prefer to do, the reality is that we have to make sure that we have some way of dealing with our residual waste. So I do think it would be quite irresponsible for us to say that we weren't going to go forward and consult on residual waste management options in early 2022, despite the fact that I might prefer it if we could have the waste minimisation conversation first. I do think that we're just getting to the point that we have to make sure that we have an option for the landfill going forward.
The Mayor? Mayor Foster.
Not to speak, but just can you put the proposed amendments up on the screen somewhere because we can't see them, those of us who are online at the moment. Or at least I can't. I don't know about the others. No, Jill's clearly saying she can't either, so we don't entirely know exactly what you're debating in terms of words.
I think Sean's just doing it now.
Thank you.
That's Sean.
No, I thought you were thinking about Christmas. Look, I looked at this paper and it was interesting. I noticed Councillor Foon said she had to read it 3 times to understand what the purpose of it was for. And I see 8 noting resolutions and 2 agreement to agree something that we're going to be doing anyway. So I appreciate officers bringing this back to us for clarity to what we've already decided we made a strategic decision on. But when I see things of noting, it's just noting stuff that's already underway. We're not agreeing to anything. And so that's why I will agree with the officers' recommendations, but really I'm not going to support 5 noting amendments. I just think it's superfluous and it's not something that this committee should be considering at this level. So I acknowledge Councillor Foon's passion about this, but we are here for the city as a whole, not just for our particular passions. Thank you.
Ms. Kelly.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to say that I understand your passions and the things that you value, and I also accept, Councillor Foon, that you're very sincere with what you believe, but I can't support, and I'm not going to support any of the amendments, and why I'm not going to support them is because I actually think that they're surplus to what's required. And 3 of them that I've seen, they're actually what you're asking, and it's just noting, is already in the substantive, what's it called? Motion, recommendation that's been put. So I am going to support the recommendations in the paper that's been put forward by in the report from 1 to 10, but I won't be supporting any of the amendments.
Okay, well, that's not 3 in a row for supporting that, is it? Do we have any other speakers? No? Right of reply?
Yes, kia ora. I do want to take a moment to thank all the councillors for listening to me over the last 2 years about this. But I will remind you that rubbish rates and roads are pretty much the key core fundamental jobs of a council. So it is quite important, and we are in a crisis, and the reason why this paper has come to us is not to note, but we are in a situation where officers have needed a decision to move on. I'll also just comment that particularly one of the noting amendments that I've brought is around C&D. C&D is not really mentioned in the operative plan. I want to make sure it is part of our resource recovery business case. I was assured of that, and that is why it is amendment that I've brought it as a noting amendment. I won't go into the rest, but just it is really important as we go forward. And yeah, I just want to finish by outlining the beautiful vision that our Pūroro community brought when we all went down there to have a hui about their waste, in which the Mayor attended. But that they are not anti-landfill. I know we often get people starting with that. They see their landfill as the landfill that they have to live next to as a taonga. It's with native ngahere and manu all around, and that we only use it when we really, really need to. And that really did blow me away, that a community could come at this council asset with such a beautiful vision. And I really ask that we support them to get that vision. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Foon. So the motion's now been put and has been seconded. I now invite you to...
Hang on, and we've got to take them separately. So can you...
I now invite you to vote, but we're going to take some separately.
1 to 9, perhaps take 1 to 9 together.
Just a moment, Councillor Calvert. I've already figured this out.
Well, you didn't say so.
Shall we, we'll take 1 to 9.
You went straight to vote.
Councillor
Fitzsimons. Straight to vote.
Can we see them on the
1
screen?
to 9,
It's very hard
10,
to...
and then 11 to 15, right?
It's really hard
That's
to
what
follow.
we're going to do as chairman, by the way.
Chairperson.
The Zoom, we're just asking.
Is that
if they can see
okay
the-
for the folks online? We're
No,
gonna do 1
it's
to 9,
really hard to
do
follow.
number 10 separately, and then do Laurie's amendments 11 to 15.
Can we see the number 1 to 9 again? I did see them, but it would be helpful.
Well, they're in your papers.
I know they are online, but it's hard to manage it all.
Well,
Sorry.
I keep telling you we should get printed papers delivered to us. Is everyone okay and ready to vote? We're voting 1 to 9. Welcome. Yeah. No. Does anyone want a division?
On the next.
Unanimous, thanks. We'll do 10 separately. I'm not going to support you on this. Would you like a division on this? Division, please. Deputy Mayor?
I voted yes.
Okay, that's been carried. And the 11 to 15 amendments.
Can we see those, please? Thank you.
Yep. Judging by your debate, you'll be no. And that's been carried. So thank you very much. I'd like to thank officers for clearly articulating or responding to questions. I thought that it demonstrated a deep understanding of where we're at. So I really appreciate that. And obviously to Ms. Proctor. Right. We'll move on to the last couple of agenda items. And I think the next one is we've got the Water Services Bylaw minor amendment. Apologies. Okay. Is Jeff? We will take it as read. So Layla doesn't need to do it. Does anybody have questions? I'm happy to move. Who wants to second? Councillor Condi. Okay. Any debate? We're all good. Right to reply, good. I'll put the motion, moved and seconded. Those in favour, press 1. Those against, press 2, of course. Right. Good. I'd like to thank officers for anyway, okay. Next item 2.5, forward program. Siobhan, I will take that as read as well. Okay, now I did have... Where have we got to on the Island Bay one?
It's going to planning environment in March.
Well.
We don't have any traffic regulations.
When were you going to tell me about this? So an amendment to the printed program is that the Island Bay traffic resolution's been pulled from infrastructure back to planning and environment. I wasn't meant to come here, was it? Okay. Anyway, so take as read. Let's. I will move with that amendment and a seconder, Jenny Condi. Please vote. Maybe I'll vote no.
I'll do it for you, sure.
Oh, so I have.
So what are you, I was allowing you to do it.
I'd rather remain in an advocacy role when it comes back rather than being the impartial chair. Yeah, casting vote. All right, action tracking. So we can take it as read. I'm going to follow up with something a bit separate. There seems to be a big group on waste minimisation, and I just wondered whether we can consolidate all those. But any other questions, folks? No, we're all good. I will move. Second, Councillor Condi. I invite you. Any debate? No? Where's me gone? All right, let's vote.
The Mayor has voted yes.
Councillor Matthews votes yes, not no. Yeah, there's a typo. All right, folks. Well, that ends the agenda, and I guess we will conclude with a closing karakia, the one that I keep forgetting to practice. Unahia, ki te uru, nui, kia wātia, kia mama, tia nāko, tia nāna, te wairua. I te ara takutu. Rongo. Whakaeria aki. Kia wātia, ara, kua wātia. Good on you, folks. Enjoy the afternoon. And have a great Christmas from the Infrastructure Committee.